Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Kolopkin, and a monumental weekend this past weekend. Ramifications, as I said, the shots heard around the world. Your thoughts, Dr. Lopkin?
Yeah, this was an amazing strike. Let's start with the fact that this is something only the U.S. could do. We are the only ones in the world that have the bunker buster bombs. So if we didn't do this, Iran's nuclear enrichment sites would have been completely safe. Now, it has not been up until now, with as radical as the Democrats have gotten, it has not been controversial to say that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. Reagan said it. Bush said it. Clinton said it. Bush Jr. said it. Obama said it. Yes. Even Biden said it, except, nobody on either side of the aisle ever actually did anything about it. This is the first time that an American president said to Iran, all right, you've got 60 days, come to the table, let's negotiate. And Iran screwed around and didn't take it seriously. And they went, all right, that's it. Guess what? Iran's taking negotiations seriously now.
Yes, well done. I 100% agree. And even beyond the bunker busters, which are impressive, just the logistic, it was a master class in a military initiative, up there with anything the Israelis have done or we've done previous to that. And to me, it says a lot, because I think there has been a Biden malaise, meaning questioning, could we even paint the sidewalk and do it competently? I think it sent a signal, obviously to Iran, but the rest of the Gulf states and the world, including China and Russia. Your thoughts on that?
It definitely
sends a huge message.
It definitely sends a message. Russia and China now know, we're serious about what we tell you, which, let's face it, during the entire Biden administration, nobody took him seriously. What was his big threat? Don't. Well, now Trump has said, look, I told you what I'm going to do. If you don't believe me, screw around and find out. What was absolutely amazing about this operation, this is not an operation that could be done at the drop of a hat. We had to get naval ships into position. That takes days, if not weeks, depending on where they're currently stationed. We had to get the planes set up. This is not something that, again, you can do with the drop of a hat. When Trump said he was going to give negotiations 2 weeks, he had to have already been planning this. And the fact that it was planned, it was executed, and nobody heard a word about it until the operation was underway was an absolute masterstroke. And of course, Congress was yelling, well, you didn't tell us. Well, first of all, he actually did contact several of them.
Jeffries didn't pick up the phone.
Right. Jeffries didn't pick up the phone. But realistically, what are you going to do? Call Ilhan Omar? It'd leak. Adam Schiff.
Okay, you tell you.
It would leak so fast.
Suicide.
Yeah. So the way they pulled it off was
speaking
brilliant.
Of the secrecy, yes, 100%. But then post-strike, you have the deep state rearing its ugly head, don't you, in the form of the leaker?
Yeah, you've got this anonymous leaker, and I'll be really honest. I'm not 100% sure the leaker actually exists. The reporter that broke the story that the leaker allegedly gave them also reported that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian misinformation, also reported that the Steele dossier was legitimate, also reported that Joe Biden was sharp as a tack. I don't know that this reporter has any legitimate sources. They may just be making this stuff up. And I have never accused a reporter of that, but the New York Times does have a history of that. Everybody remembers the Stephen Glass controversy, and it has happened in other outlets. So I don't know that there's an actual leaker, or if the reporter just decided to make up what they called facts, or if their so-called source isn't somebody that has access to information. It's just somebody that wants to make Trump look bad. So they keep calling this reporter who's obviously not good enough to verify the source.
I think it could be all of the above, Dr. Lopkin. If I was a betting man, I'd say it's a low-level bureaucrat who might have seen a memo that barely reflects on anything and calling his buddy at the New York Times. I do love, and I heard this in real time because I'm on vacation, that Trump just eviscerated CNN, the New York Times, and MSDNC. So I flipped as soon as the press conference is over to CNN. It was like the honeymooners, humma, 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 humma. Wolf Blitzer, they were shaken. You could tell they were nervous and they were rattled, saying, "Oh, we don't have any disparity about the troops and blah blah." And it was very interesting. I think it is a new Donald Trump. I think he learned a lot of lessons from the first term, and I actually enjoy it. How do you like that?
Yeah, I think what's really amazing is that CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times didn't learn their lesson from the Hunter Biden laptop, from the Steele dossier. You would think they would be more careful about reporting things before checking them out. But apparently, if it goes against Trump, they don't care if it's true. They just want to get it out. Again, that's not journalism. Journalism is about the facts. And I mean, the Democrats.
Yeah, I think journalism. Go ahead. Sorry.
Journalism has fallen by the wayside. But
there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, the Democrats have also just lost their mind, calling for his impeachment. And this was Representative Green, who's been trying to impeach Donald Trump since he was reelected. AOC called for the impeachment. They were slapped down, not just by the Republicans, but by the majority of Democrats, who basically just said, no, we are not impeaching him. We're not looking into impeaching him. Sit down and shut up.
And I think that's going to, how do you like this prediction, Dr. Lopkin? For their own survival, that's going to become more common. AOC, Crockett, Omar, please shut up. You're embarrassing us. You were already taking on water. Don't put another torpedo in our boat. I mean, and the rebuke that Trump did was masterclass. Called her low IQ. I mean, it was just Crockett. I mean, AOC is, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, is low IQ, but then you got to go to Crockett to get really stupid. You know, I mean, it was unbelievable.
Last week, Crockett made a whole bunch of comments. This is actually before the strike. And, you know, she said so much that is absolute nonsense, absolute stupidity. There was a question in the briefing room to Caroline Leavitt, asked about the fact that, you know, Crockett keeps saying these things and she's a rising star in the Democratic Party. And Leavitt's response was, yes, and the Republicans are thrilled that she's a rising star because every time she opens her mouth, it makes the Democrats look worse.
I 100% agree. I think you talk about being, Trump being in their minds. There's talk about Trump getting a potential Nobel Peace Prize, not only for the current Middle East events, but putting the kibosh or cooling down tensions between Pakistan and India. What will be the degree of their heads exploding if that ever happens?
Well, I mean, certainly their heads would explode, but people need to pull back on that talk because he was not actually nominated yet. A GOP representative from Congress wrote a letter to the Nobel Committee nominating Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee has not accepted the nomination. It has not been put forth. Also, the Nobel nominations actually came out in March. So even if the Nobel Committee does decide, okay, we're going to accept this, that nomination isn't going to come out until March 2026 for
Good,
next
right in
year's,
terms of the midterms.
Right. For next year's, certainly the elections, but for next year's Nobel Prizes. So he has not actually gotten a Nobel nomination yet. He's been suggested for one by a member of the Republican Party. Knowing how far left the Nobel Committee is,
Obama will get it again.
Right. I'm not going to hold my breath. Remember,
not holding my breath either.
Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize for participation. He showed up.
And isn't that fitting?
Yes, he hadn't even been president yet, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, quite frankly, given what Russia did in Crimea under Obama, all of the upset in the Middle East under Obama, they should have forced him to give it back.
100%. Well, talk about giving back. This was not on the agenda as we prepped before the podcast, but I think he's basically given back. That is Obama, his entire legacy. I think the Obama library is a microcosm of his post-presidency. I think he has about as much weight and pull in America as who knows, an Elvis impersonator. Your thoughts?
Yeah, he's doing speaking engagements now, and
at Walmart.
He made one recently in Connecticut where he was, of course, disparaging Trump and the divide in the American public that he's blaming on Trump. The divide actually started under his watch. But
yes, it did, especially the racial divide, by the way.
Yes, but this was basically a big thing in the news cycle for about half an hour. Obama's influence is done. The only reason at this point I think that he's doing these speaking engagements is because he needs to build up a war chest for the divorce settlement.
I think you're in to get the hell out of the house. You don't want some crazy lady calling you an asshole, do you? No. And then speaking of that, I think it's hysterical. She had a clip on her unwatchable podcast. I mean, unwatchable. And one of the people on her show was like, "Oh, you have two girls. It would have been great to have a little boy." She goes, "Oh my God, no! It would have been a little Obama." Like, a little Barack. And I was like, "Whoa, dude!"
It's like, right, insult, yes, insult your husband, who is still, despite his waning influence, still the titular head of the Democratic Party. I mean, Biden can't string two sentences together. The kids are running the show, and when the Democrats actually need to get a message across, they bring dad back to, bring some order to it, but he's lost complete control. And of course, insult
you talking about Obama?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Obama, again, Rolling Stones 2024 tour. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's not 1981 anymore. His shtick, even the way I saw him on the show in Connecticut, his professorial approach, the whole shtick's gone. Sorry. It's yesterday's news. How do you like that? The tour is over.
It is, and every time Michelle Obama says another comment, his legacy dies a little more.
Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Before we leave and get into other issues, we want the doctor's assessment viewpoint on how does this impact the Middle East? Does this reset things? I have my own opinion. And what does this do to the overall geopolitical framework of the world?
Well, we saw a major reshuffling this week after the strike when Iran did a missile attack on a U.S. airbase in Qatar. Now, the attack itself was feckless. I mean, there wasn't even any injuries. But the only Middle East countries that did not condemn the attack were Iraq and Afghanistan. Every other Middle East country stood against Iran. Iran has never been this isolated. On top of that, before the strike, while they were doing volleys back and forth with Israel, intelligence has reported that Iranian leadership expected support from Hezbollah, who was nowhere to be found. So even
the number you have reached is not in service at this time.
Even
Correct.
Their own proxies are going, no, we don't want to have anything to do with this. Iran has been completely isolated. The only allies they apparently have left, and let's be honest, these are not allies to be taken lightly, are Russia, China, and North Korea.
Getting back to the strike, though, again, this definitely is in line with talking about global reset. I think the spectacular nature of this strike basically causes pause for concern on our adversaries. This is not Joe Biden. This is not, and looking at the capabilities of the United States versus even a country like like China is night and day at this particular point in time. Do you agree?
Yes. Trump showed that the U.S. has teeth again, that we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be bossed around. But what I find really funny is that, again, I mentioned on the last podcast that there are ties between Iran and Russia. Iran has been supplying Russia with arms for their war in Ukraine. Now, what's the one thing everybody has heard ad infinitum from the Ukraine war about NATO. Why is Ukraine not being allowed into NATO at this time? Because right from the NATO charter, an attack on one is an attack on all. Now you've got NATO committing to spending NATO states committing to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. In 2016, most of them weren't spending 2%. When Iran's proxies didn't come to their rescue, when every country in the Middle East but two condemned their strike on Qatar, they suddenly realized, wait a minute, we can't take on the United States. And not only would it be the United States, they would have to take on all of NATO, who at this point, I mean, let's face it, when you've got Middle Eastern countries telling the U.S., yeah, use our airspace, no problem.
Yes.
When you've got
Whoa, before you go on, that is not something to be taken lightly. That is monumental. That is a paradigm shift. You agree, Dr.
Yes.
Lotkin?
And it goes further, because when you've got Syria telling Israel, yeah, use our airfields. These are countries.
Yes, I think there's going to be.
These are countries that would never have stood up to Iran in the past. And now you've got the son of the former Shah of Iran, who's been in exile since the 1980, speaking to the people of Iran via broadcast, trying to get them to rise up against the regime.
It's funny that you mentioned this, Dr. Lotkin, about the only two Arab countries or Islamic countries condemning the raid, okay? But we also have Bernie did too, the self-hating.
Yes, the strike was condemned by a number of the Democrats immediately. What is really amazing, though, the strike was condemned by a number of the Democrats, but what's really amazing is that if you listen to what they're saying and when they said it, every one of them, except for the most extreme, the Squad, Bernie, they all backtracked. They all came out immediately. Oh, this was irresponsible. And then 2 days later, when the Iranian airstrike failed, when it became very obvious that the ceasefire was now going to hold, these Democrats that were so quick to go, it was irresponsible, he should never have done it, we're going, well, you know, it was an important decision, and, you know, I hope it works out. It's like all of a sudden, it's like they're backtracking because it was the right call. And like they've been doing.
No, but it's also reading the tea leaves. America was overwhelming majority was in favor of this. It showed America's power. And once again, the Democrats take the 20%, not the 80%. They're a rudderless ship without direction, and they were scrambling 2 days later. Am I not correct, Dr. Lotkin?
You are. Like they did with immigration, like they did with trans men in sports. They picked the wrong side once again. And, you know, and part of this is Iran threatened to retaliate, not with missiles, but by activating sleeper cells here in the U.S.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, yes. Well, ICE has been rounding up illegal Iranian immigrants, but who let these sleeper cells in? Joe Biden and the Democrats. And there's nothing they can say that's going to change that fact.
100%. God forbid if it ever plays out, another egg in your face moment, but they can't help themselves. You have an LA County mayor, okay, of a small city outside in the LA metro area, basically telling gangbangers to defend their turf against ICE. This is the state of the Democratic Party. And then you look at one step further, you look at New York, an anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli, of course, Bernie supported him, is now in the leadership position in terms of ascending to the Democratic nomination for mayor of New York City. And as DeSantis says, well, I'm going to have to prepare a lot more condos for the people exiting New York City. And I agree with him on that.
Yes. The fact, well, first of all, let's take a look at the actual results, because this was the Democratic primary in New York City. Now, we know historically it is the far left and the far right that turns out for primaries. The centrists tend not to. There was no Republican primary, or, I mean, I think technically there was, but Curtis Lewa was the only candidate. On the Democratic ballot, though, you had this idiot. The only, you had a couple of other people that were so minor, you know, nobody knew who they were. And you had Andrew Cuomo, who apparently did very little in the way of campaigning. And
almost nothing.
Right. And yet none of these people actually got 50% of the vote. So you're actually talking about the fact that the Democratic primary was won by somebody that has a plurality of the vote, not a majority, and quite frankly, not a big plurality. Now, why is that important? Because when it comes to the general election, that's when the moderates come out. And that's when everybody is going to be voting in the same election, Democrats and Republicans. And you don't just have Curtis Lewa. Eric Adams is still on the ballot as an independent. Andrew Cuomo is still on the ballot from one of the minor parties, and possibly also as an independent. I'm not sure how he registered. But that means that you have a very good chance of the Democrats splitting their vote three ways. Which means...
Very good, Dr. Lopkin.
Which means, actually, I think because the moderates did not come out to vote, you also have to remember that turnout in this election was incredibly low because it was 102 degrees in New York City on primary day.
Correct. Well done. Yes.
So I think you've got a very good shot at this point. I think that the odds-on favorite is probably Eric Adams. Because
agreed 100%. Yes.
I think Curtis Lewa is going to do better than people expect, but I don't actually think this wacko leftist has a shot. And if he does, looking to the bright side, if he actually wins the New York City election, this is going to be an absolute boon for New Jersey and Connecticut, because the rich folks are going to get the hell out of New York City. It'll probably be a boon for Westchester. Businesses are going to flee the city.
You know something? It'll be Connecticut's brightest hour. You're going to have Fairfield County and Litchfield County. You couldn't buy a house there.
Yes. This is going to, that if he wins, that is going to be the best thing that could have ever happened to Connecticut and New Jersey.
Nice. Speaking of good things that are happening, it looks like Omar, who's basically from Minnesota, claiming America's the worst country, she's facing a little more headwinds in her chances for re-election. Your thoughts? I just don't think she's going to get it, but hey, it's happened before. We had last cycle, a couple of the squad getting whacked.
Right, and this is not the first time this has happened with her. 2 years in the 2024 election, she barely squeaked out the victory. So yeah, I mean, when the primary comes along for her, she's going to have another primary opponent. She had one in 2024. She was able to withstand it, but not by much. And I think her, her star has failed. And quite frankly, we are seeing little by little the dismantling of the squad because they keep fighting for the issues that America is against.
Plus, wait a second. Yes, 100% true. But also, America shifted. 2020 with the Summer of Love, that's like ancient history now. America has changed. They have not. I think that's a valid point. What do you think, Dr. Lobkin?
It is a valid point, and it is very different. In 2020, the so-called Summer of Love, when the George Floyd riots happened, not only was there no help for the police, nobody sent in the National Guard, nobody sent in the military, the police actively surrendered areas of cities, areas of Portland, Seattle, Chicago. The police just said, we're going to let them do what they want there. And, it was absolutely amazing. And I believe it was Portland. They actually lost control of one of their police stations.
Yes, it's true. Yes,
now,
it was Portland.
Right. Now, fast forward to 2025. Riots in LA get out of hand. Trump sends in the National Guard. Bass and Newsom throw a hissy fit. And the Ninth Circuit, which is a very liberal appeals court, comes in and says unanimously, Trump has the right to do this. You've got no case here. Now, I'm sure he's going to appeal that, but if the liberal Ninth Circuit said Newsom doesn't have a case, do you really think the Supreme Court is going to change that decision?
Yeah, I have a bridge to sell you. How do you like that? So, speaking of the landscape changing, 2020, 2017, all that, CNN, especially, mid-Trump first term, was kind of riding the wave, so to speak, okay? They're in deep dog doo-doo. They have executives fleeing, cost-cutting. I know we've talked about it before, but this time this shit's really hitting the fan.
Well,
no viewers, zero.
Yeah. Part of
Your
that
cooking shows bigger than that.
Part of that is the fact that they were lying to the American public for years,
yes.
and now everybody sees it. But part of it, the cost cutting, the executives leaving, actually has little to do with that and more to do with the fact that Warner Brothers Discovery has announced that they are selling off all of their channels. So it's not just CNN, CNN, Discovery Channel, all of their cable channels are being packaged together and spun off into its own company so that Warner Brothers is essentially going to be its own standalone company again. And you have the massive shift from linear television to streaming. In fact, I believe it was a week and a half ago, for the first time in history, streaming services took more of a bite out of the audience than linear TV did. Netflix and YouTube television had more viewers than the cable networks did, than the cable providers did. So it is a massive shift. And CNN
may I interject
is
one point on that?
To take advantage of it.
Yes. I think it's worse than what you've articulated. The few viewers that are left are basically in retirement homes, and they're certainly not in the prize demographic.
No. Well, CNN has been losing that demographic for about 15 years already. So
There you go.
it shouldn't come as a surprise that young people aren't watching CNN. To be perfectly honest, there is still a significant group of young people watching Fox, and that actually amazes me. Because when you look
No,
at
can I interject something about that? I think it's not going to be long for the world. It will happen to them as well. But if you're a young person, Fox, there's some attractive aspects to it, literally and figuratively. They're attractive people. They have fun. It's just about the whole thing. CNN, liberal, boring, stodgy. Okay, Fox, conservative, fun. It's entertaining. CNN's like watching paint dry. If it wasn't for airports, they'd have like one viewer.
But the trends are, I mean, Fox is the laggard in these trends that they're not losing that audience as quickly.
Although I think it will happen to them eventually.
Yes, they're also losing that audience because the young audience is not watching linear television. They want news. They get alerts on their phone. They're not watching, the days of Walter Cronkite when everybody would make sure to be around the television for the 6:30 national news. Those days are dead and buried. Now, news happens, you get an alert on your phone, especially young folks. If they're interested, they hit the story, they read the story. That's it. Done. They don't have to check it again.
But it's even beyond news. Even a dinosaur, a living fossil like myself, I watch a small fraction of, is what you say, linear TV than I used to. I have my subscriptions on YouTube, other platforms, and it's tailor-made to what I like and what I enjoy. So it's beyond just getting the news bit or information piece. It's people tailoring what they want to see from places like YouTube and others, which I don't think, again, I talk about Fox, they might be doing better now, but their days are numbered too.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be linear TV in some form or another, because YouTube, all of these other the streaming platforms, all this, in terms of news, they still need a division to actually create the news. And you can't really do that on a digital platform like sending out an alert. You need to have a team actually doing interviews, and as long as they're doing it, you might as well aim a camera at them. So I think there's always going to be some form of linear news available, but it's going to end up being a very small part of the market, probably eventually going the way of newspapers.
I would agree 100%. And one thing I do find amusing, your opinion on this, please, is they still think they're wagging the big stick. That is CNN, MSNBC. They're almost yelling in the middle of the woods, tree falling, tree falling. No one's there.
Yeah, they're preaching to the choir. They have their audience, which is shrinking rapidly, but those that are still watching are true believers. They believe everything MSNBC and CNN says. That's why they're watching. But that audience is shrinking, and they're actually, both of them are getting a larger and larger share of a massively shrinking audience, which is not it's not a good
no,
position
that's not a good thing
to be in.
And I think the same people that are watching CNN and MSNBC are going to the Dead reunion as well, and the Neil Young, and the list goes on. Basically, as you said, the tour of irrelevancy. Well, Dr. Lopkin, another show, very interesting week. Your opinions, again, were awesome, and we'll be back next week, and our listeners can comment on the show and give their opinions, suggestions for topics, all of the above, correct?
Yes, let us know what you're thinking. Go to xvadio.com/connect. You can also message us at the Facebook Carnivore Radio page. And of course, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Bites at the xvadio.com. the Carnivore Radio website, the Apple Podcast app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkins. See you next week.
We'll see you then.